welcome to part 2, Myth as Memory. Here we continue our framework and our story that will eventually lead us back to Eden. The argument here is that myths are multi-layered stories based on historical events. And some of these myths may depict a lost higher civilization. And if that's the case, then maybe mythology can help us navigate the future. How old are our oldest known myth? It's at least 100,000 years old. And we know this because of this story. You have a hunter that chases 7 sisters across the heavens. And these 7 sisters are known as the Pleiades. And they are known as 7 sisters because they have this, and this kind of universal myth, because the Greek speaks about it as Orion and the Pleiades, but the Aboriginals have a similar story and they link it to the same star system. There is just one problem if you can count, or you can only see 6 stars. But there are actually 7 stars, but 2 of them are combined. So over time they moved, so you can't separate them anymore. But all 7 were visible around 100,000 years ago. And here you see a reconstruction of Atlas and Pleione and how they would appear at the night sky around 100,000 year BC. Myths are multi-layered stories. And what we mean with this is that they are encoded through the cycles of time. So they incorporate memory, events, entertainment, learning, philosophy, religion, and all into one bundle, one story that can survive generations. And that in the end they try to disclose a pattern of reality. Here you see Odin and Attila the Hun. And some people speculate that maybe Attila the Hun is Odin because he shares a lot of similarities, like he fathered a lot of kids, becoming like an all-father, especially for the nobility of Europe, and he was a brave warrior, won a lot of territories, and did a lot of things that seem similar to the stories of Odin. So the question is, was Attila the Hun Odin? The answer is no. Odin is a much older entity. But there are similarities, because maybe Attila tried to emulate Odin. And in one way he becomes an avatar of Odin that embodies Odin. So he does things that Odin would have done, right? So he tries to achieve objectives that is typically Odin. And so then stories of Attila may turn into or influence the stories of Odin, right? And that's how it becomes multi-layered. So as we see, myths are multi-layered stories that preserve a memory over time. So then you have to ask yourself, does myth depict an actual ancient civilization? Actually depict a higher civilization? Now you would maybe ask me, where's the evidence? And here some would point to the pyramids, others to Pumpumtu, where they have carved this into with super precision, and it's super duper hard stone. And then you have these walls that look melted together, fused together, and then you have this massive stone of Baalbek. So yeah, they were capable back in the days, at least. And then you have the Kafar project. The Kafar project is the synthetic rupture radar, or SAR. And when you use that, it's you take satellites that point down, and the radar back resonates an image. Short and simply explained. Tomography shows that there are 8 vertical shafts descending 648 meters down into a cubic chamber. And this is from the report, and here you see more like artistic. If this is the case, right, then the case of higher civilization is closed, and we can say yes, it was a higher civilization, because this looks much more like it has a geothermal. This is technology. But in this series, we're not going to look at just evidence. We're going to use our heads. So we're going to use our heads to come to a quite similar conclusion. And we can do that by asking these 4 questions. What would happen if we fell today? And does the stories that you've been told make sense? Do they follow the patterns of history? And would you recognize more advanced technology? And when does it make sense to build the pyramids? So the first question is, what would happen if we fell? To our stories, to our knowledge, to our technology. So imagine humanity suddenly disappeared, wiped from the face of the earth. What would be left? What would be left of our civilization in, say, 1,000 years? The answer is very little. The pyramids would be left, because even plastic dissolves in a few thousand years. And the pyramids would probably be covered in sand. So you have to ask the question, is it natural to fall? Is it natural? And the answer is yes. It is natural to fall if the civilization's power to do it, the power to maintain itself, what fuels the civilization, is unsustainable. And here you see a picture of from Worldometer. And if you look at oil, you can see we only have 37 years left. We still have lots of coal, but that would be a decline. That would be a clear decline. And so we we don't need to exit oil just because it's bad for the environment. We need to exit oil because it's bad for our civilization if we don't do it and find a good sustainable solution. So the second question is, do you believe this story? Do you believe this story? Because this is a story we kind of been told, right? And it's a story of humanity. Our recorded history is around 5,000 years. But we've been around for around 200,000 years. Conservative. And some say we've been around for a longer time, like even 2 million years. And some even more. But we will work with 2,000 years. So let's start now. This is us now. This is 5,000 years. This is us and the known history that we have. So each of these represents 5,000 years. And for the first 50,000 years, you know what we did as humanity? We did absolutely nothing. But don't worry, for the next 50,000 years, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna do nothing. And for the next 50,000 years from there, we're gonna do, basically, again, we're gonna do nothing. We're chilling. And then for the next 45,000 years, we're still doing basically nothing. And then our time starts and we build pyramids. Then in our time, we hit the Middle Ages, so we decline a little bit. But then we rise again and we reach the moon. Of course, we have Göbekli Tepe that was buried around 12,000 years ago. That doesn't make much sense according to this narrative, but don't worry about it. Besides that, a freak event, that we can call it a freak event, then we did nothing. But our modern history depicts a clear pattern of rise, decline, fall, rise, decline, fall, rise, decline, fall. So this is like the way we want to see the world, I think. Like in terms, if you look at the capability scale and you have at the bottom, you have the bare minimum, And then you have the capability that is the moon. It's a continuous story, right? It's just getting better and better. The stock market is always going up, up, up. But the story you've been told is that humanity did the bare minimum for the longest time, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, we reached the moon. But if you look at, say, the natural pattern of things, here you see the Antarctic temperatures that span over 800,000 years. And you see there is like a rise and fall, a rise and fall. And you see that like you kind of hit a bare minimum. And it forms a pattern that I like to call the natural pattern, the end pattern. You have like a quick rise, a slow descent, and a quick rise, and a slow descent. And a quick rise and a slow descent, and so on and so forth. Now, if we apply this to the capability scale, then our history should look somewhat more like this. And it goes up and it goes down, up and down, up and down. A quick parallel, if you look at this is the Dow Jones index. It's a graph of the stock market and the crash of 2932. But the graph lies a little bit, because if you take into account inflation, the real price only regained permanently in 1985, so basically 50 years later. So from a crash, it takes a long time to get back up to previous heights. And what if history works in a similar fashion? A fun thing to notice about this is that this is not natural. This is, the stock market is all human. It's a human invention. So it works opposite of the end pattern, the natural pattern. So it's like a cursive N or a reverse N. You can see that you have like a slow and steady climb, and a really quick descent, and then a slow climb back up. And you can also see this quite similar pattern here in an annual growth rate for the world population, right? It rises really quickly and then it declines all the way. You will see that the world population also will decline later on if we don't fix it through technology. So when we apply the reverse end pattern or the end pattern to history, it should look something like this, because these patterns matches what we know of as known history. And the question really is then, did any of the peaks, the previous peaks, out-peak us? But you can ask yourself, was your grandpa's grandpa a dum-dum? There have obviously been smart people throughout history, all the way from the Stone Age to you. So the idea is that you have the same potential as within humanity. It's a question of development, like how physically developed you are, how mentally developed you are, how creative you are. So we have the same potential, but it's a question of development. And I have like a feeling that this guy had a higher development of his potential than maybe the modern man. But that's just a feeling. This leads us to the third question. Would you recognize more advanced technology? Just imagine going back 300 years with modern technology. Say an iPhone, or maybe just a light bulb. And the iPhone is obviously out of juice because you can't use it. And then you just give it to someone. And you don't explain what it is. Now, what would he or she grasp what it was? And how it worked, like the nature of the thing? Or would they say like, oh wow, that's simply an amazing piece of art? This is the world's smallest violin, and that's a strain of human hair. And this is the smallest robot in the world. It's designed to bring medicine and inject medicine directly into cells. And it was developed by the University of Texas in 2016. Now here you can see, like in terms of scale, the nanobot is about 120 nanometers. While the violin, although incredibly small, it's 100 times the size of that robot. So then you start thinking, haven't I seen this before? Doesn't this robot kind of look like a virus? This is a bacteriophage, and it has a very similar design, and it looks a lot like the nanobot, because it has the same function, right? It goes to a cell and it injects its genetic material, and before this nanobot, it would be inconceivable to even suggest this, but could viruses be ancient technology that we somehow lost control over? Because they work in a very similar fashion, these bacteriophages. Weird thing about viruses is that they are not alive, but they do contain RNA that can influence DNA, right? So, and this is wild speculations, right? But could viruses actually be self-replicating nanobots from our previous civilization? And it was a tech that we lost control over. And maybe this can explain a few concepts in terms of mana, ki, magic, that is really all about controlling these viruses in order to shape reality around you. And the main point here is that before this robot was made, it was inconceivable to even suggest this. You get it. This leads us over to the fourth question. When does it make sense to build something like the pyramids? Or any of these structures? Like, these people were obviously super capable. They could move rocks like this, and they could build walls like this and carve stone like this. Wouldn't it make much more sense to just make smaller stones, right? Use smaller stones to build their constructions. So if we take into account the four forces that we previously discussed it in terms of capability, the power to do it, the ability to do it, the skills to do it, the knowledge to do it, and ambition, the will, the desires, the visions, and competition, which really is the reason to do it, and capital, which is the resources and the means to do it. And you put it into a scale where you say, building the pyramids are either really hard or it's really easy, right? You can put impossible at super hard, right? And the ambition is either like crazy or it's kind of rational. It makes sense why you want to do it. And in terms of competition, does it benefit you? Do you have like a good competitional reason to do it? And then you can say like if it's art or maybe it's technology. And in terms of capital, it's either really expensive or really cheap. Now, the story of the pyramids that you've been told is that it was really, really hard to do it. It was crazy ambitious and it was super expensive. And what they ended up with was like just an amazing art installment. And so you can ask yourself, do you believe that story, right? Because if you believe that, then that's fine, but that will point to a lower civilization. But if you believe any of the others, that maybe it was easy and cheap, then it will point to a higher civilization. If it was truly rational, it points to a higher civilization. That it may, these are connected, like rational, in terms of that it would give you a competitive edge. It was something that the community actually saw as like, yeah, of course we're going to build this, and so on and so forth, right? Imagine the president of your country saying, yeah, you know what, we're going to allocate so many resources for 20 years building a useless art installment, but it's going to be awesome. Like, he would not rule for a long time, so the emperor would using his slaves or whatever, so you could say that it was cheap in that sense, but it's not, because he's using resources that could have been used to farm the fields, to improve civilization, build roads, build houses, build temples that people actually use. Right? It all comes down to what kind of story do you believe? What kind of story do you think are more likely? And you can stress test this by asking the question, can we build it today? And the answer is kind of no. In terms of capability, it's quite hard, but it's still doable. But if you ask the same question, could we have built it 100 years ago or 200 years ago, the question would be, no, that's way too hard. And in terms of ambition, right, wouldn't it just be crazy to spend a lot of time and resources to do it? It might be cool, it might attract some tourists, but it's still a crazy ambition, because the reason to do it, like the competition or the incentive to do it, is that at the end of the day you end up with a useless building that's basically just an art installment. And in terms of capital, it's quite expensive but still doable. But since these forces don't really align with each other, we have not recreated it the way the pyramids were built. We have made replicas, but they are built out of different, cheaper materials, right? Like the pyramid in Las Vegas. Because yeah, it is cool to make a pyramid, but it's not a pyramid of the same quality. So that leads us to the question, does the myth depict an actual advanced civilization? And the answer is, it's possible. It's possible. But why is this like so problematic? Accepting that, okay, we've been up at a higher level before and then we've fallen. Why is this problematic? Because it doesn't fit with the current narratives of those in powers, right? Because at a sense it would mean that with all the data available, that the academics have made this error that they see in the 1 + 1 = 1.1. And that proves that the thought processes that led to the conclusion of the existing narratives are wrong and kind of retarded. And then you would have to ask a question, where else are this kind of thinking applied in the academic world? And I can promise you one thing, and that's they are going to fight tooth and nails to never let this be excavated, because they will lose the foundation of power and their credibility. If it's possible that our myths and stories depict a higher civilization, then what would happen if we reverse those stories? Right? What could we learn from them? Once you go into different mythologies, you will see that they depict similar ages, right? The Greeks, they speak of the Golden Age, to the Silver Age, to the Bronze Age, to the Heroic Age, and then to the Iron Age. That's the start of written history. And then you have the Hindus, they talk about the Yugas, right? That follows a similar patterns, that ends in Kali Yuga, that's our age. And then in Bible, you can say that it starts out in Eden, and then after we eat the fruit of good and evil, we kind of have the exile event would be similar to the Silver Age. And then you start with the pre-flood, which would be similar to the mythological Bronze Age or Dharvarpa. And then you have like Babel, that's kind of the end of that story. And then the Abrahamic Age, which is again our age, right? And if we go back to the end pattern, or the natural pattern of how history unfolds, we are gonna now try to apply this pattern to the ages and see how that could play out, right? So this again is just for illustration. It's from the temperatures of Antarctica. The red line is our capability. So if we are above the red line, we're able to, say, go to the moon. That's a thought experiment, right? So imagine the Golden Age starts up at the top. It's at the peak, right? And then we fall, and then we rise again up to the Silver Age, which is far beyond our capability of going to the moon. And then we fall again, and then the Bronze Age. Then we fall from that, and we have a short peak again with the Age of Heroes and Babel, and then we descend totally into the Iron Age, right? And this is where we are. But it could be a question of whether we are just there and we are bound to descend. So where are we in this timeline, right? So what does the Golden Age tell us? The Greeks tell us that the people lived very long and had in perfect health, and they were in harmony with God, with the gods, Kronos, that was the main god of that time, and nature provided abundance to the people, and there were no war. The Hindus tells that people lived to be 100,000 years old, and this was the age of truth, where everything we were living in 100% Dharma, and they lived in perfect harmony with nature and no war. And then we go to Eden. They walked with God and angels in perfect harmony with nature, no war in Eden. And then we go to the Silver Age, and here Hesiod says that they lived a long time still. They were kids for 100 years, but they were more prone to war and strife. And at this time, Zeus is the new god. In Hindus, they say people lived to be 10,000 years. They lived in 75% Dharma, 75% truth. And this is where the Ramayana epic of Lord Rama happens. So you can read that if you want. And then in the Bible, it's Eden after eating the apple, like they eat the apple and then they take the consequence of that, and the fall is really the exile of Eden. And then we go to the Bronze Age, and it's a period of war, destruction, and it ends in a flood. And they have people made from ash tree, and I think this is a cool link because this links to the humans created in Norse mythology. So maybe all of Norse mythology really is the mythology of a depiction of that period of time. And here the Hindu says they lived to be 1,000 years old. They lived in 50% Dharma, like half of it was true. And it ends in the Mahabharata war, right? And it is thinking of Dwarka, the city of Krishna. And then in the Bible, we are in the pre-flood age, the age of from Adam to Noah. People lived to be basically 1,000 years. And here Nephilim walked the earth, giants walked the earth, and it all ends in a flood and possibly war. And then you have the heroic age. And I think this is kind of the final chapter really of the Bronze Age. But here it talks about demigods and heroes, and it all ends in a war of Troy. The Hindus have a similar story to that of Babel. It's called the Altar of Overreach. And then you have, in the Bible, you have the Tower of Babel. It's stated after the flood that the age of man is 120 years, but some live longer after that, but slowly less and less. And as you can see here, if you look at the age before the flood of Noah, people lived to be 800-900 years old, but they don't really, it doesn't really decline. But after the flood, they live a long time, but they decline, indicating that they lost their technology to live for a long time. And then the Iron Age starts, which is like the post-Odyssey. After the Odyssey, the Iron Age starts. In terms of Hindu, they call it the Kali Yuga. They even have a date for it, which was 3102 BCE. And then the Bible is the start of Abraham, Abraham's covenant with God, and then it's the story of Moses, David to Jesus, right? And for our point of view, it's the start of civilization. So let's try to put it all together. Right, the Golden and Silver Age tells of a super advanced civilization that somehow declined and fell. And then the Bronze Age tells of a sophisticated people who dominated the earth, that are destroyed through this domination of their own devices, with a war, Ragnarok, the war of God, and it all ends in a flood. And then the Tower of Babel tells a story of an attempt to rebuild what was lost during the flood. And in light of this, then maybe a lot of the stories of the Old Testament really are about people who interact and fight over the rights to own and preserve pre-flood and Babel technology, right? Because technology we can then see technology as divine powers or powers of God, especially if we don't understand it anymore. And this becomes kind of true in a spiritual sense, because the higher the energy, the higher the spiritual power. And that concludes our story for now. Just to recap, in this part we talked about myth as memory, and we built a case about how myth may be describing a lost time, a lost higher civilization. Now, if that's the case, then we can use these stories to navigate the future as we reach the technological apotheosis. Understand that each topic is massive, and if there is something you want me to expand upon, or maybe there's something you would like me to add, please let me know in the comments down below. The next time we will continue our story and then talk about Babel and the trial of Confucian. I hope to see you there. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this exciting. Now, if you want to be the hero of the story, you can support this work by either subscribing to the channel, engaging, sharing it with a friend, comment in the section below, or you can buy me a coffee or a beer, maybe a beer, by scanning the QR code or visiting this link down below. Thank you for watching. I see you in the next one.